Guys, welcome to the podcast. This is going to be kind of a fun little series that we're going to do on Coues deer hunting, and I'm going to go back through the 600 and some episodes and find some of the best Coues deer episodes that we've done here. And hope you guys enjoy it. We've got Coues deer hunts going all over central and southern Arizona right now, and we've got the mid-December hunts coming up here quick, and the OTC December and January archery hunts. So I figured you guys had Coues on the brain. I'm going to try and pull some of the best stuff over the last 4 years. So guys, before we get to that episode, I want to thank you for your avid support of this podcast. You guys show loyalty to this podcast, and it's amazing. I'm very appreciative of that. If you guys have any questions at all or comments, you can reach me at jscottoutdoors@gmail.com. You can also send me a direct message on Instagram at jscottoutdoors. Love to hear from you guys. Thanks for all of the support. And I also hear from my sponsors virtually every day about how much support you guys give them. So I want to thank you guys for that. I want to thank the sponsors of the podcast. I want to thank GoHunt.com. And right now, there's Black Friday sales going on at GoHunt.com. Go check it out. There's anywhere from 25 to 50% discounts. Some really cool stuff out there. Plus, you get a chance to win a free elk hunt. So go check it out. I also want to thank my friend Cody Nelson. He's the optics manager there at GoHunt.com. If you guys have any optical needs at all, if you have any questions in regard to glassing, or if you're looking to purchase any optics, whether it be binos, tripods, spotting scopes, rifle scopes, anything to do with glassing, give Cody a call, 702-847-8747. That's extension 2. You can also send him an email directly at optics@gohunt.com. I want to thank them for their sponsorship. Also want to remind you guys that you can check out the Go Hunt Insider, get a little bit of a jump start on application season. Go to gohunt.com/jscott. That's going to get you a $50 Go Hunt Gear Shop gift card. I want to thank Coues Ultralight Hunting. Coues gear is the gear that I wear on all of my hunts. You can go on my Instagram page routinely throughout the week. I'm answering questions. A lot of those questions pertain to Coues gear. Coues gear, if you want to know more about it, you can also go to Coues, that's KUIU.com. And Coues Ultralight Hunting Gear, I've been wearing it since 2010, and if you guys haven't tried it, you need to. It's awesome stuff. They also have some great sales going on right now. I also want to thank phonescope.com. If you use the JScott19 promo code, you're going to get a 10% discount, and onxmaps.com. Right now, a special for a few more days, if you use the Thanks30, so go to onxmaps.com, use the Thanks30. You're actually going to get a 30% discount. Normally here at the J. Scott Outdoors podcast, you get a 20% discount for using JScott19. But if you want 30% discount, go to onxmaps.com, Thanks30. And I want to thank them for their sponsorship. Guys, let's get right to this series on Coues deer hunting. And again, thanks for all your support. Welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. Today we're fortunate to have Jake Lindsey. Jake goes by Coues OCD on Instagram and has killed some unbelievable Coues deer bucks. And he's born and raised in southern Arizona. He's married with 5 children. He's a full-time firefighter paramedic with Tucson Fire Department. Has been hunting big game in Arizona for 22 years and guiding for 13. He just got off an October Coues deer hunt in southern Arizona where he shot a really nice buck and helped a hunting partner of his shoot a nice buck. Jake, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Jay. How are you?
Good. It sounds like you and your hunting partners had a pretty good October Coues deer season.
Oh, we have, Jay. One that we won't ever forget, that's for sure.
Tell me a little bit about it. Particularly, you were the one to strike last. I believe you got a buck just a few days ago, and then you helped your friend. Is it Mark Hardy?
That's correct, Mark Hardy. Yeah, we helped Mark shoot his buck opening day of the October hunt, and then a few days later, Mark came out and returned the favor and helped me shoot my deer.
That's awesome. Now,
to give the listeners a little bit, for those that don't know you, shooting big Coues deer is not foreign to you. It's something you have a passion for, and you've had some success in years past chasing some big Coues deer and getting to harvest a few big Coues deer. What is your biggest personal Coues deer?
My biggest buck I killed in 2009, and he scores officially 127 inches.
127 inches. Is that the buck that's a four on one side, three on the other?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful buck. And so 127 is your personal best, and this buck of Mark's that you just helped with, what kind of size is he?
Well, you'd have to see him in person to appreciate it, but he's a 3x4, although his fourth scoreable point is only an inch long, but he's a mainframe typical 3x4, but his 3x3 frame is 132 inches.
Yeah, that's an unbelievable buck. I saw a picture of it, and I mean, as far as a typical 3x3, I mean, I call him a typical 3x3 with just a tiny G4. It's as big a frame 3x3 as you can get. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I've never personally even held one this big and so symmetrical with such little deductions. Absolutely.
Just a beautiful frame deer. I want to ask you some questions about your big buck that you shot in '09, and I want to ask you some questions about, if you will, Hardy's buck. I take it that Hardy's buck is not a buck that just showed up. That's probably a buck that you guys have known about and been watching. And part of what I try and do on this podcast is I try and get into the minds of guys that are chasing big deer, and, you know, what's going through your mind as far as strategy, you know, some of the heartache that you face, you know, knowing about a buck like that, or like the one you shot in '09, and, you know, all the things that go with it. And as well as that, I always like to try and let the listeners, as well as myself, kind of gain some takeaways from guys that have had the opportunity to, you know, watch and witness big bucks, and then see it through fruition, and you know, see them get harvested. When did you first know about Hardy's buck, or when did he know about it?
Mark glassed that deer up 4 years ago, and
wow.
He of course was quite a bit smaller 4 years ago, but the first time Mark really got to know the deer was the next year, which was 3 years ago, and he started getting some pictures and whatnot of the buck 3 years ago.
Okay, so 3 years ago. So he saw it 4 years ago, but I'm assuming because of age class and probably antler structure, it was a nice buck, but not one that maybe just you know you went crazy over. But then 3 years ago, he starts getting trail camera photos, and you see it. What kind of buck was it 3 years ago? Because I'm always interested to see a buck like this. You know, do they blow up? You know, did he get bigger, then smaller, then bigger again? You know, kind of how did his antler transformation work over the last, say, from 4 years, then 3 years? What has the buck done?
Well, Mark would probably be the expert on this one, but as far as I can recall, 4 years ago, he was your typical 90, low 90s buck, and then the following year, which would have been 3 years later, he was right about 100 inches, and he was pretty recognizable, although some of the points may have come off the main beam in different locations, but he was still pretty recognizable. I think his biggest jump came from 2014 to 2015, which would have basically been 2 years ago, 2 antler sizes ago.
So he jumped from probably, I'm guessing, like 100, then he jumped all the way up well over 110, and all of a sudden became a buck that was like, oh my gosh, we've got to focus in on this buck.
That's correct.
And did you specifically, Mark, and you guys, did you specifically hunt this buck last year and didn't get it done? I mean, is there any backstory that, like, oh yeah, we shot and missed him, you can't believe it, we didn't get him, or no, we never found him during the hunt? Is there any story with that?
Yeah, there is. Jay, we really hunted hard for the first time for this buck last year, and Mark spent quite a few days leading up to the hunt scouting, trying to put glass on this deer, which was extremely difficult where this deer was living. And and I would go and help him as well, and we just never could put glass on this deer. Obviously we knew he was there with trail camera pictures and stuff, but we never put glass on him at all. And then on the third day of Mark's hunt last year, we were fortunate enough to find another really big deer that Mark ended up taking as well.
Okay, so it's interesting that the deer is there. You guys are as good as they get as far as glassing, and you still can't put eyes on the deer. You see another deer that's a great deer that you can't pass up, and Mark takes that deer. That, to me, that kind of in a bottle, like right there, like, I don't know what the word is. It like bottles up why I love Coues deer hunting. And I'm just curious your thoughts on it, where this deer's there and you still can't put eyes on him. And I think that's what keeps us all coming back, because think about some of the deer that you don't even know are there, and you're out looking, and then all of a sudden, boom, you see a big buck, and then you never see him again, that type of thing. I mean, you never know. I mean, I guess my point is, you could sit on a hill for 14 days in a row and never see the buck, and he's right there alive and well the whole time. You just haven't put your eyes on him.
Absolutely. No, you're 100% correct. These big bucks are obviously big for a reason, and they find their little tiny home range. And even like in our case, we had a pretty good idea of this buck's home range, but we just still couldn't put eyes on him. And obviously, when you're hunting in country that holds a buck like that, there's always the potential that there's another one not far from there. And that's how we got fortunate enough to find his other buck that he ended up shooting, which I do want to add that other buck that he ended up shooting had a gross score officially over 120 inches as well, and also officially netted over 119. So just a tremendous deer, tremendous typical 4x4 buck that obviously we couldn't pass up at the time.
So that just tells me that a couple of these deer found a place where they could live and grow up and not get killed, not get hunter pressure, and I think it's unique, but it's interesting to think about that there could be a couple of bucks of this caliber, within a close proximity of each other. But I think it goes to show for Coues deer hunters out there listening that there are places that if you push yourself far enough to go into some of those places where maybe your density of deer is not very high, maybe your chances of seeing a deer is not very good, maybe some of those places are areas where you can find, if you're going to see a buck, it's probably going to be a good one because you need age class. And it's interesting that you guys found a little pocket where a couple of these bucks came out. So last year, you guys are looking for the buck that he killed this year, but this big giant 4x4 typical steps out, and no way he can pass that up.
That's correct.
And then this year, the target focus obviously was on this buck, correct? For Mark, that's the buck you wanted?
That's right.
So were you able to see him from at all before? I mean, during the summer, were you able to put your eyes on him, or did the buck just never show up until he got killed?
No, Jay, we were not able to put glass on this deer
Wow.
until the day before the hunt started.
So huge anticipation, because I assume you have trail camera pictures, so you know he's still alive. You know a lion or an archery hunter hasn't killed him, and you go into a situation where you've never seen the deer. Tell me about how you were feeling the day before the season, or if you saw him the day before the season. Before that, your anticipation going in there, was it like he's a ghost? Let's just go try and find him.
Absolutely. I think that's what keeps us going is, we've always felt that the hard part was over as soon as we find a big buck. And it's just a matter of trying to live with that deer as often as we can. Both Mark and myself, we got young families, and we're pretty busy people, and Mark runs his own business as well. So we use our time as wisely as possible, but when we find a deer like that, that's where all of our time is dedicated to. And we certainly made no exception for this buck. And even with all the time that we spent prior to the hunt beginning, especially Mark spent an exponential amount of time trying to put glass on this deer. Finally, we still just couldn't manage to do it until the morning before opening day of both of our hunts.
So it's not a matter of you weren't trying to put glass on him. It's a matter of you couldn't put glass on him, or not until the first time you saw him. It wasn't like, well, we glassed for him a time or two and didn't see him. It was, we tried different angles and looking and just couldn't put eyes on him.
That's right. It's kind of funny. I'll drop a name here, but Dwayne Adams had a funny term in one of your last podcasts, the angle of the dangle, and it really does speak volumes with how important it is to just get different angles. I strongly believe that these big Coues bucks live in an extremely small core area, and although you may get them on trail camera in one place, and we all have a tendency to focus on the one place that maybe our camera is, because that's where we're getting the pictures of them. That still might not be exactly where that buck lives, and so it's always important that you almost 360 try to look in every nook and cranny that you can.
That makes sense. Okay, Jake, back to what you were just saying. I think I've got a couple questions there. If you don't mind, how regular of a trail cam pick from not this season but last season? So you were hunting for him last season. From that period of time, let's say about a year's time, fast forward to when the hunt started, are we talking like 4 or 5 trail camera pictures of this buck over that year, or are you talking like 30 or 40 or hundreds? What kind of like hit rate were you having?
Well, it varies depending on the time of the year, of course. But this buck was no different than any other as far as venturing to the trail camera more often at certain times of the year, in that late July, August, and early September time frame when they're doing the majority of their growth. That's certainly when we got more pictures of his buck. And but we always had an idea that we were close to his home range, because we continued to get pictures of him even throughout the year. Easily 40 to 50 pictures of the buck.
Okay. So let's back up a second. So for those out there listening, an experienced Coues deer hunter like yourself with Coues OCD like your handle on Instagram, are you telling guys out there listening that, if they're going to be targeting Coues bucks, the best time is in the velvet, and would that be what you would consider the time to get the most pictures of a buck?
Yeah, I would say that's when you're going to get absolutely the most pictures of a buck. That's when they're most likely moving the least amount. They're traveling. Their core area is certainly smaller, and in their home summer range, and so there's not much reason for them to move, especially in most of these southern Arizona mountains where water and food is pretty plentiful.
Do you notice, I'm curious, I've gotten other people's take on this. Do you notice, like, once they go hard antlered, do all of a sudden the pictures of them on those same cameras, do they just stop? I mean, I've heard people say that, very, very consistent in the velvet, very consistent, and then all of a sudden just boom, pictures stop. What's your take on that?
Sure. I think anybody who runs cameras has seen that. I will tell you though, Jay, I also believe that it has to do with how close your camera is to his core area. And I've heard different takes on why they might hit mineral and salt licks more often during that prime growth time. And some of them make sense, some of them don't. But I think that for obvious reasons, when they get closer towards the end of their growth and certainly rubbing the velvet, for some reason they have no need for that mineral lick as often as possible anyway. I've always thought that it made sense, and somebody told me once that the high nitrogen levels from the monsoon seasons and all the food in all the feed that we've got out there, that salt helps balance it out. I'm not a biologist, and I could be 100% wrong on that, but it just kind of made sense that it's more for a balanced nutrition during that time of year than it is anything else.
It makes sense to me. I want to ask you a question about core area. In this particular case of Mark's buck, now that the buck has been harvested, in your mind, how big of an area, when you're saying this buck had a core area, if you had to guess, what would be let's call it from edge to edge, if we're talking about a circle from the left side to the right side, so to speak, or what have you, how tight of a range do you think this particular buck held?
One side of the circle to the other, I'd give him 800 to 1,000 yards.
So 800 to 1,000 yards from one side to the other. That right there, if you think about that, that is a super tight range. And so my point with that is, if you're a glasser trying to find a buck, when they stay in that tight of a circle, no wonder you guys couldn't put glass on them. And I don't even know the country, but if it was thick, if you add any, thick brush at all to a range that's that narrow, that tight, I can understand why it would be extremely difficult to see a deer like that.
Absolutely. It was thick, Jay. I think the majority of these really big deer live in country like that, and it makes them far more vulnerable when they're out there on those open slopes and stuff. And I honestly think though that the biggest obstacle is getting over the mental challenge of staring at the same stuff day after day after day. And getting over that hump of knowing, of them finally seeing him. Mentally it can kind of wear you out, and you'd start thinking that maybe you're wrong and you got to go look somewhere else, when really your gut's telling you he's still there. He's just not moving.
Well, I think I can't, I can't imagine, because I've been there, but it never ceases to amaze me how mentally tough it is. I think one of the positives is if you're able to have a trail cam and you've got recent photos and you know that he's there. I think the thing is, I think some people get pictures of Coues bucks and they just don't honestly believe that their core range is as tight as it is. And, I know guys that are big buck hunters, and I've talked to them and said, hey, your big buck's, way over there. What are you doing over here? Oh, maybe he's moved. And I think I talk to guys like yourself over and over and over, and that's why I love having you guys on. I think it goes back to show exactly what you said. I mean, I think you said earlier, if you find a big buck, that's the most important thing, is finding them and then kind of honing in on his core area. Is that what you're saying? Is if you can see a buck one time, you have a much better chance of finding that buck again, because their core areas are so tight, the odds are he's in his core area. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would, Jay. I think that something that's really important to recognize, I guess, in anything that you want to be successful in, is that if you don't envision yourself being successful, then you won't be. Or if you can't dream and you can't imagine wrapping your tag around a buck like that, then the only way you're going to is by pure luck. And of all the this is going to sound like a personal development book, but it's so true that in all the most successful people out there, they truly do envision themselves going through the motions and seeing it all work out. And I think a lot of people, whether they get a big buck on camera or they happen to jump one up while they're quail hunting in the spring sometime, they kind of go back to camp and they like telling the story of the big buck that they saw, or the big buck that they shot at last year. And it's more of a campfire story and a legend than it is an opportunity to capitalize on the next year and actually see that it can be a reality. It's a lot of work and it's a lot of effort, but it can absolutely be a reality.
Speaking to that exact example that you bring up, if someone were to see a big buck, and let's just take a buck like some of the ones you've shot, or the hardy buck, that's just a giant buck. I consider pretty much anything over 120 a giant. And with that being said, I think you bring up a good point that some people see these deer every once in a while, but they may never actually go back and ever look for the deer. And what you're saying is, if you see a big buck, put in the time, and more than likely, if you see him, go back and keep looking, he's going to be right there somewhere.
No, absolutely. And if you're not going to go back and look, then call me up. I'll go.
I don't know, man. You might be chasing some phantoms, because I've heard some wild stories over the years.
That's true.
So Mark's buck's 130-inch rough mainframe 3x3 giant buck. He saw him the day before the season. Were you guys able to stay on him till dark or anything like that, or was it just a quick glance? And then how did your strategy then focus in on opening day, and kind of how did it all go down?
Yeah, well, we found him a little bit late in the morning, the Thursday morning before the hunt started. We found him a little bit late in the morning. We only got to watch him for about 30, 45 minutes. And then he sort of went up and over into a little side canyon, a little cut. And we then got right back on the same point for the afternoon, and we were not able to locate him the evening before the hunt started. And then first thing the next morning, we were on the same point, and still were not able to locate him the next morning either.
Do you feel like he was out of sight from you the whole time where he topped? I mean, was there no place to to set up to look into that side canyon, or was it, was your angle bad? What was the deal?
Well, it absolutely had to do with the angle. From where we had initially glassed him up, we stayed there the rest of the day before the hunt started, and even started there the next morning, opening morning, still didn't see him. And that's when we decided we needed to split up, and Mark needed to somehow get over and look up into that canyon that we had seen him go into the evening before. I'm sorry, the morning before.
Sure, I understand. So here's a question, if you can follow me here. So Mark, you guys saw him go up and over into a side canyon. Do you feel like where he went into, not where you saw him, but where he went into, do you feel like that canyon was more of his home, or do you believe that where you actually saw him was more of his home? What do you feel like was a place where that deer lived more?
That's hard to say, Jay. I guess I try not to say that I know exactly where a deer lives, or I know exactly what a deer is going to do. But I can tell you this much: where we glassed him up initially was in a pretty safe, shady, thick part of that mountainside. And where he went up into was relatively the same. He, for some reason, just chose to go over there up in that canyon, and that easily could have been his home range, but we're talking 150 yards
right.
distance from where we initially glassed him up until where we glassed him up the next day.
Okay, fair enough. When you did first see him, was he all by himself, or did he have a couple little buddies with him that were his eyes and ears?
Yeah, well, I think that maybe that's what ended up being the demise of this buck. He's kind of a loner, even in the 3 or 4 years that Mark spent a lot of time with this deer, and that I had the opportunity to do the same. As he kind of did his own thing, and then once in a while he'd have a buck that would want to hang out with him. But in this case, when we first glassed him up the day before the hunt started, I glassed up a little spike, and I thought I had seen a bigger bodied deer go in the trees. So I kind of kept going back and forth to that spike, and sure enough, then this deer popped his head out. And so he kind of had some buddies, but I wouldn't say that he had one real close. He was still kind of a loner. I think a couple bucks just tended to hang out with him more than he hung out with them.
What is your setup, tripod and binoculars? What is your go-to setup?
I use a slick carbon fiber 634 tripod, real lightweight carbon fiber, breaks down real small, and I've got the Outdoorsman's pan head, and I've got the Swarovski 15 by 56 HDs that I use.
Okay. I love those new HDs, don't you?
Oh, they're great, fantastic glass.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let me ask you a couple questions about Mark. Mark moves so he can look up into that country where you saw him go into. How did it go down from there?
That's right. About 10 o'clock in the morning, he moved over there to go look up in there. he was fortunate to have his brother-in-law Jason with him as well to kind of help pick it apart also. So I stayed on the one side and they went over to the other side, and we spent the rest of the day just trying to pick apart both sides. And it wasn't an extremely far look for Mark and Jason.
How far roughly?
Anywhere from 500 to 700 yards.
Okay, so they were pretty tight. If they were able to see him, they were almost within range to shoot him.
That's exactly right. And you know, my look was a little bit further, but we were definitely within range for sure. And so we looked all day long, and of course nothing happened on my side. And then right about 5 p.m., about 10 after 5, is when they notified me that they had found him right up in that cut where he went into the day before. Wow.
That's the excitement level for you hearing that had to be just incredible. I'm going to guess that he went over the top, and do you know, like, how far did he go from where he topped over it? Was it like he went on a big walkabout, or was he just tucked away in a nice little shady spot up there?
Jay, I think he just tucked himself away. The fact that we didn't glass him up Friday morning at first light, I think there's a strong possibility that he just stayed right over into that side canyon the rest of Thursday and even all day Friday.
Okay, and so I'm always curious where big bucks are found and where they actually die, and I think it goes back. I did some podcasts like you alluded to with Dwayne Adams. What if you had to say which facing slope was it? Was it a northeast face? Was it a north face? Was it what direction? So in other words, I'm trying to grasp where was that buck harvested as far as where did he spend his time? What direction was that slope?
It was generally a north-facing slope.
Okay, so in other words, here's a big buck, here's guys that hunt big bucks, and you guys killed them on a generally north-facing slope, which I'm assuming in most places north-facing slopes are the thicker, more dense, more shady side of the hill.
That's right, Jay.
Okay. In your experience with other big bucks on October hunts, would you say that is a very common denominator?
Yeah, I would. I would. And, you know, there's always the exception to the rule. I shot a buck 2 years ago, Jay, that scored a little over 120 inches, and he, believe it or not, lived on a south and west facing slopes. So, you know, you can never predict, but there is a general rule. So I think largely that has to do with hunting pressure as well.
So in other words, if they're not getting huge pressure from other hunters, they could very easily be anywhere. You're saying, what I'm reading into it is that if they're getting quite a bit of pressure, they tend to be in the thicker areas because if they go in the open areas, they're going to get shot.
Absolutely. I think it also has to do with just being vulnerable in general, whether it's to mountain lions, just being seen in general. So that's why I think the majority will usually be found on a northeast, or even like Dwayne said, you know, some of these northwest facing slopes get a tremendous amount of shade as well. So anywhere there's some shady cuts, that's generally where they're going to be found.
Do you feel like a Coues buck can live? Well, let me think. How do I want to ask this? Do you think lions are harder on Coues bucks in thicker country, or harder on Coues bucks in more open country? Which one do you think the lion has the best opportunity to kill a buck, if you had to guess?
Well, it would make sense to me that they have a better opportunity in thicker country just because they can move in closer. And going back to what we were saying earlier, just as far as where a deer might spend the majority of their time in the thicker part of the mountains and in the cuts and stuff like that, that's probably where it's going to happen the most. Now, that might sound contradictory to being vulnerable on those open slopes, whether it's to hunters or mountain lions. I just think that in general, the heat, the predators, the mountain lions, the hunters and everything like that will keep those deer moving less, and certainly in places where they feel a lot more comfortable, which is going to be in the cooler temperature and where there's a lot of feed and a lot of cover.
Yeah, I agree. Part of always hunting, you're always, it's easy to look on the yellow slopes because deer stand out and you can see them. Like you said before, I mean, a Coues deer buck can be really anywhere. Well, it is fascinating that, it seems to me that these bigger Coues bucks in general, when I talk to guys like yourself, seems like more often than not, they get harvested on the thicker slopes. And what's interesting is, it's the biggest hunter out there, the mountain lion. Thinking back to a lot of them that I've seen mountain lions on open slopes. I've seen them on thick slopes. I can't, tell you that there's a direct correlation to where I've seen them, and I've seen a bunch of them, as I'm sure you have. But as a Coues deer hunter, with the October hunt's already over, these November hunts, and then I believe there's like a late November, early December hunts in some of these southern Arizona units. Would you tell guys out there to be more successful? Would you be focusing more on thicker north-facing slopes than the areas that are open yellow grass or open faces?
Yeah, I would say so. I think each hunt is different, Jay. From the October hunt all the way through the December hunt, I think the closer you are to October, the less deer movement you're going to see, and I think the closer you are to December, the more deer movement you're going to see. So if you're targeting a specific buck, getting around his home range, his core area, it probably makes more sense to put in for the October tag. Now, that might upset a few people that really like to draw those October tags, and the odds might not be great anymore. But that's just how it goes if you want to pattern a big deer.
Yeah, I mean, I think for years, I mean, if you even go back to, Dan King and Jim Reynolds and go back to, Dwayne Adams and, some of those guys have been doing it a long time. It's not a secret that, a lot of those bucks have been harvested on the October hunt. But for a lot of my listeners out there listening, you also need to remember that October hunts, typically the temperatures are not, high 80s to even mid 90s, and your deer movement is, I would say, half as less as it is a couple weeks later on the November hunt, just from a temperature range in itself. So I think a lot of people listening to this podcast need to understand a guy like Jake and his buddies that are out there, they're focusing on one or two big deer, and these guys are willing to sit on a hillside for 7 days in a row and not see a deer, but know that the big deer might show up in that period of time. Most people listening to this podcast, they don't want to go 1 day without seeing a deer. And I know how it is with guys like yourself that have routinely killed and helped kill big giant deer. You have to be willing to suck it up, and literally suck it up like it sucks. I mean, not seeing a deer for 3 days in a row, there are not many people that can go and not see deer. So I mean, I don't think it's any big secret. I certainly think October, if you have the ability to pattern buck and you have the time to focus in and hunt one specific buck, yeah, you get first crack at them. The odds are you probably have a better chance. But I'm going to say for the majority of Coues deer hunters, they might be better off with those November, late November, early December and hunts because you, like you said, you've got half as much more movement because of temperature. And I would ask you a question. Do you truly feel that temperature is the reason that they move more a couple weeks later?
I do. That's my opinion, though, Jay, but I really do.
Okay.
I will tell you this much, though, Jay, also just in regards to the time of year that you're hunting. I think that whether you have a big buck spotted or not, it's far more important that of the country and the place that you're hunting. So if you do not have a big buck, if you do have a big buck spotted, it's probably easier to shoot him in October. But if you're in the right country, there's still a strong possibility that you're going to kill that deer in early November or even late November. And I largely believe that's because of hunting pressure in general. Don't expect to find a really big deer during that early November or late November hunt unless you're hunting in country that just does not get the pressure.
Let's talk about that a little bit. There's places all over Arizona. Well, we're talking specifically southern Arizona, down by Tucson, down where you live. There are places in units that there is road access, and it seems to me that the bigger bucks tend to be further from the road, and that further from those areas where people can get to in a day hunt, meaning can they walk there? It's opening day of the deer season, and they put their pack on and they've got their lunch and whatever, and they go hunt, and they can walk. Person can only walk so far, and then have to return and be back to camp that night. So, do you think there's a direct correlation between consistently finding big bucks and getting in that area where you can't walk in one day and return back to camp, let's say 30 minutes, an hour after dark, walk back in your camp with a flashlight? Do you think there's a direct correlation of size of bucks if you can hunt in those areas where the day hunters don't get to?
Yeah, absolutely, Jay. At least for multiple days anyway. You might be able to hike in there once, but you try to spread that out over multiple days hiking in and out, and it's just too tough.
Guys, make sure to check out part 2 with Jake Lindsey on episode 205. Guys, thanks for listening and supporting my podcast. If you would, please go on iTunes and leave me a comment and leave me a 5-star rating. That helps our placement on iTunes. If you'd like to send me an email, you can at jscottoutdoors@gmail.com. You can also follow along our adventures at jscottoutdoors.com, also on Instagram or Facebook.